today I will be chatting with Chris Hotze. Did I say it right, Chris?
You did.
All right,
Perfect.
perfect.
But
So, from the age of 8, Chris developed strong connections to real estate and private equity investments. His father, Ernest, had 8 children and worked as an engineer. But on the side, over many decades, he was able to acquire a large portfolio of commercial and residential real estate. Inspired by this, at the age of 29, Chris had his first exposure to creating value from an underperforming real estate assets. Chris took over and managed a large multifamily property, and to this day he acquired over 150 million in real estate, and he's active in 6 states: Texas, Washington, Nevada, New Mexico, Indiana, and Mississippi. The interesting thing is that Chris found out about underperforming assets and the repositioning game, which we will talk about in length later on. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Chris to the show. Hey,
hey,
Chris.
Ellie, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Great. Excited to be on your show.
Thank you so much. So,
We share the same passion,
yeah, it
recurring
seems.
revenue.
I know. That's a great passion. There's so many ways to create revenue, and I really wanted to kind of, before we dive into the APS of real estate, wanted to hear from you about what you do today and how you got started in underperforming assets.
So we're a real estate investment firm. So I head up a group that we buy industrial and neighborhood retail that is strategically located. We have some development component that is a part of what we do, but we are really are investors. We develop, we'll buy assets that are undervalued. We'll buy assets that we think can be torn down, and we'll ultimately reposition those assets into a place that we think will ultimately be profitable for us. We try to hold for the long term. We like the long-term cash flow play. So we own shopping centers. We have shopping centers that I've had almost 20 years. I started basically by accident. It was a passion of mine. My dad was in the business on the side, but I ended up getting into it because I just knew I wanted to have that passive recurring revenue coming in every month. And that was such a big early passion of mine. I had a young family when I first got out of college, started having children, went to get my MBA, went to law school at night, and I was also working in the real estate business as a side gig. And so my first business was actually property and casualty insurance. And I liked that business a lot because every year you had insurance renewals. So there was a recurring revenue stream. So you didn't really have to sell too much. Once you had to book a business, you had a recurring revenue stream. I just happened to be very successful at that business at a young age. And by the time I was 32, I just said, yeah, I've got to go do it in real estate because I felt like there was a bigger place to do or to have an impact on the world was through real estate. So that's what we ended up doing. So I started Crescere Capital, and Crescere, after many years, Crescere has grown to about 100 million in assets right now. We've sold some in many states. We have some right now in a couple of different states. We're in a growth mode. We've just bought our largest industrial property. We're building and developing our largest retail center, and we actually have put together our largest land assembly in the urban core of Houston right now. So we have a 12-acre land assembly that's pretty incredible. So a lot of good things going on. It takes time over the years to kind of figure out how you're going to do it, where you're going to do it, and then also the economy kind of dictates where you go. And so that this is what we do, and we have followers. So we syndicate and have had people that have followed us for many, many years. And it's just been a fun ride.
That's awesome. And I don't know many syndicators that have been in the business for 20 years. It looks like it's pretty popular these days. And I'm still shocked when I meet people that haven't heard of a syndication, of that model today. So doing that, 10 and 20 years ago, I can't even imagine. I cannot imagine how challenging it was, or maybe not, to find a way to reach out to investors and have investors even hear about it because with social media today, it's pretty easy to get exposure, to all kinds of real estate strategies out there. So I think that's really, really interesting. So I would like to kind of start talking about the assets that you're buying and start there. Earlier, you mentioned that you were purchasing a retail and doing some developments, but would like to know what type of assets do you currently invest in besides retail?
So we have land plays that we will buy in the urban core that are typically multifamily, or they'll have some auto shop on them. And in Houston, we don't have zoning.
Mm-hmm.
And so we can buy property that may be underperforming, and over time, Houston gets a bad rap because we don't have zoning, but it actually ultimately allows Houston to reinvent itself. And so there's some areas of Houston that at one point had old industrial. And so we see these old industrial sites and old buildings that all of a sudden start becoming really, they stand out because they no longer fit in the area because the area has improved so much. So what we'll do is we'll look at those properties. We'll identify which ones are underperforming, and we'll go in and see if we can buy some and get a significant holding, and we'll try to assemble property. And so right now we're part of an assembly of a group of assets that, over time we think are going to be transitioned to a higher and better use. And part of the change, quite frankly, is us coming in and buying that property. So if we don't make that position, somebody else probably would have eventually, but you kind of have to take a leap of faith that you're buying something, and buying something that has value and buying something that has some exit strategies. But the position to us is very valuable to buy some really good dirt that ultimately, for the short term might have some covered land aspect to it. So we might have some income stream to cover the taxes and some other costs that you have associated with holding land. But if you can do that and then reposition an asset, you have to have a little patience and you have to have some exit strategies that are built in. But there is a reward there. And there's also a reward that we think is really cool, Ellie, is that we can massively impact a community if we do it right and bring in some killer architecture, some great elements, brick, wood, amazing features, bring in great tenants. All of a sudden, you start changing the area. And particularly if you have a corner to me, a corner is like the one thing that changes everything. If you have a junky corner or a vacant old drugstore on a corner, a bombed out building on a corner, it impacts a whole area, particularly on major corners. And so we've been able to buy a couple strong major corners and do some architectural things there that have just really transitioned the area. And then all of a sudden it makes the area change. And then all of a sudden I see other developers with big names start buying around. And so all of a sudden, you've changed the dynamic. And that's a fun process because you start impacting the entire city. So Houston gets a lot of challenges nationally because we don't have zoning, but I think it actually has worked to our advantage. A lot of these old urban areas where they've really transitioned. It's cool to see them come around. So we're doing a lot of that.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Do you have any specific asset that is your favorite type of asset to purchase that might be easier to repositioning?
We actually have a corporate directive of what kind of assets that we want to buy. So there's specific kinds, which are neighborhood retail in the urban core. So I've had retail that's out in the suburbs. It's a little harder to own out there because you have a lot more competition. The urban core, there's just hard to find places for land. So there's a limited amount of competition. So we like that. We like industrial that's in the urban core, mostly light industrial, things that aren't really that beautiful, things that maybe aren't on the big REITs radar screens. And then we also like just property that is underappreciated and undervalued, that just looks like something else could go there if you put the right assets together. So that's a great game that we play. So those are our three main core components. So the kind that we like to buy things that aren't, of those three classes, we like to buy things that aren't overpriced, that aren't highly sought after. We want to really, have a relationship where we can find a real value that actually makes sense as a buyer and makes sense for the seller. It has to, nobody ever comes to the closing table if they don't think they're getting a good deal. So it's got to be good for both. And, we look at a lot of assets, and over time we try to, we only pick a few every year. And that's the one thing. So we try to buy value, which you and I talked about earlier. The second thing we try to do, and I think this is important, is we try to have multiple exit strategies. That we try to, is this all this is going to be? If there's another exit strategy down the end, what's it going to look like 10 years from now? Is this asset going to be different? Is it going to be repurposed? All these, cities like Houston right now, cities like Nashville, they're undergoing a lot of change. Dallas, Austin, becoming much more dense. And so where we used to have everywhere in Houston grocery stores that had 20 acres of parking lots, we don't have that anymore. They're building grocery stores on 2-story parcels with 2-story parking garages. And so you have smaller footprints for grocery stores because everything is becoming much more dense. I'm sure it's happening in LA. It's happening in Seattle. It's happening everywhere. So we recognize that. And so as we look at some of these inefficient properties, we look for that and say, okay, what's the exit strategy 10 years from now as this city gets bigger?
And so we kind of covered, the assets that you're purchasing. We talked also a little bit about the strategy, and I would like to focus on the process. So can you share with me and the listeners, where do you usually find those underperforming assets?
There's a lot of, how many deals do you have to look at to find one deal, right? What's the question? That's the golden question, right? It's a lot of deals that we all have to parse through. And sometimes, I hate to say this number, but it's thousands of deals. And I'm sure you have the same thing, Ellie, right? You probably look at, if not, you may not be going through due diligence on 1,000 deals, but 1,000 deals come across your desk or email. And so, and we're constantly having deals brought to us. A lot of times we bought things that had a lot of hair on them, a lot of things that had a lot of challenges: pollution, contamination, old gas stations. And early on, we determined that, some of these things with problems, we could figure out. And so that was always the very initial stages of my business experience in the real estate business, was buying old gas stations all over the country, and they all had problems.
And I used to manage gas stations back in Israel, so I know exactly what you're talking about.
They all leak, and even if they had the newest equipment, they leaked. And so there was always some kind of component that we had to deal with. And we also bought buildings that had asbestos. We bought buildings that had other challenges. And, I'm pretty good at surrounding myself with people who can figure things out and create solutions. And so over the years, we've built a team of people that don't not only work with us, but are people who we associate ourselves with. That, we have a situation, we'll make a determination whether we can fix that or not, and how much it's going to cost, and start plugging those numbers in from an investment standpoint. But sometimes, problems are good. Problems are, quite frankly,
they're opportunity.
And quite frankly, problems are going to happen even when you do buy a property and things are going good. You're going to have some problems. And the fact that you're doing a lot of things, and this is for anyone who's an investor who listens to your show, you're going to have something go wrong at a property, and and I hear all these people say, I don't want to own real estate because I don't want to get called in the middle of the night or whatever it may be. I don't want to have a leak and I don't have to fix it. Well, I look at those problems as actually good problems. We had somebody run over a fence at one of our centers yesterday. That's a good problem. It's a nuisance, but it's a problem that just shows that you're in the game. And that's a somewhat relative easy one to fix. There's much more difficult ones, but same thing with buying a property. You could come up with a lot of reasons not to buy something that has problems, but putting together a team who can figure out how to fix it and make it work, that's really, really valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would like to move to the last part of our interview and talk about strategy. So we were talking about underperforming assets. What is your definition of underperforming assets? Where do you know, at what point do you look at a deal and say, oh, you know what, that could be an opportunity for us. There's enough, meat on the bone to move forward and take a risk and purchase it?
Well, there's some real easy ones. We bought a property that was a former pizza joint, and it was not well taken care of by the family that owned it. There were vagrants living inside of it. And I looked around and I said, yeah, this is right in the middle of one of the greatest neighborhoods, and it's allowed to be run down like this. So you drive by it and you say, well, this can't be. This shouldn't be this way. And so, a couple of phone calls later, you try to find out, who owns it, right? This is for everybody. Everyone should be doing this if they're listening to this show in every community that you're in, because quite frankly, you can see some of these things, they stick out like sore thumbs. It wasn't the first time that I ever did that either. We bought a shopping center up in the Garden Oaks area of Houston about 12 years ago from a family that didn't live in the United States. And the first time I drove by it, it was run down. It had some good name tenants in there at the time. Radio Shack, who was in business at the time. You had a liquor store. You had Eckerd Drugs, which had just been bought out by CVS. And so these tenants were in there, but the center was run down, had not been well maintained. And I was able to sit down and talk with the family. I had them come in from out of the country, and we ended up working out a deal to buy the property. So it was underperforming. It was clear as you could see it when you drove up, just the way that it was maintained, the way that vacant spaces were left dirty. And so it hadn't been updated. The parking lot had potholes. And so those things, particularly where they're on a hard corner or they're in the middle of a community, they impact everything else. They drag it down. So, I mean, I'm not patting myself on the back by any means, but it did impact that whole area. We were able to get Starbucks to come in on a redevelopment, and all of a sudden Starbucks comes in, starts bringing interest from everyone else in the area. So next thing you know, we have a major intersection with a lot of interesting concepts that came 12 years later. So you just have to keep your eyes peeled for it. And, there's a lot of things. This is one thing I'll say to Ellie is, if an investor is listening to this and they're a solo investor, a lot of people just specialize in a 1 mile radius of a city, right? That you might live in Santa Monica, you might live in LA, you might live in Napa, California. A lot of people that I've seen that have been most successful have said, I'm going to go specialize in this one little part of town. And we're going to just know it extremely well, and become the specialist on this one street. And I can name multiple people that have done that in multiple cities. And it's really amazing. You don't have to be all over the country. And so a lot of people won't even get in the real estate investment game because they feel like they have to be these big REITs buying all over the place. Mm-hmm. And I've seen people in local communities that own, things in just one part of town and, multiple assets. And over the years, they become the specialists in that part of town. Doesn't matter where they went to college. It doesn't matter what MBA program they didn't ever go to. Most of these people didn't even have degrees. And it's just really remarkable to see how accessible it really truly is to everybody. if you just keep your eyes peeled. So it's a good question. How do you find them? They're just out there. You have to probe. And if you see something that looks really run down, that's probably a good place to start.
And what would be your advice for someone who wants to look at his neighborhood, look for opportunities, and do what you do, basically purchase a small retail or some stores at a corner, or even one store in a good corner, and try to repositioning and improve the property? What would your advice be as for the first few steps to do that?
Get out of your office and go get in your car and spend Saturdays and Sundays, because that's when there's less traffic. You know, those are really, to me, the best work days for going out and seeing things. That's one. Okay. Go and see properties and see. Number two is focus on areas of town that are just on the cusp, that are maybe not the hottest part of town. So you said Santa Monica is probably pretty heavily priced. La Jolla, California. I mean, there's parts of Houston that are you just can't touch. But there are parts of town that are in transition, and you can pretty much identify those. If you can't, you look up what transitional areas are, right, with it. Gentrification of an area. And ultimately get to know that area and see if that's a place where you want to invest. So that's the second thing. And then the third thing is to find someone who can mentor you. Learn as much as possible from them. Sometimes that's how I got it. That's actually how I got in the game. But when I would find a property, I knew that, particularly when I was early on in this game, my father had passed away, and his assets are still owned by my mom. And he had just rent houses and some other things that ultimately became, a part of a larger portfolio that was really remarkable. But I knew, being one of 8 children, that I had to make it on my own, especially being the last child. So I started, and my dad was gone, and he really wasn't a great real estate practitioner. He was a good real estate investor, but I had to learn the practice. So I found an old real estate developer, and I would bring him deals because I found that I was good at finding deals. I would walk in his door and I'd say, hey, I've got this corner here. I've got it under contract, and I think it could be really good. What do you think? And one of these days, I've actually had 2. A couple of brothers that were twins out of San Antonio. They're like, let's invest together. Let's do something. So they're still partners today, almost 20 years later. And there was another older developer that had done amazing things in Houston. And he said, yeah, let's do this together. So if you show drive and determination, and you're able to see these deals, put them in front of other people, share those with a mentor and they have to have done it before. And you'd be surprised. They'll help you figure out how to do your first deal. My first deal was $283,000 acquisition on a corner off of FM 1960 in Northwest Houston. We bought it from the University of Illinois Foundation. And I knew we were getting a great deal, but it was the first note I ever signed. I had 3 kids that were young, and I remember going to the bank and signing that note. I think we put like $50,000 down on it, something like that. And that was between me and this partner. And I remember being, signing a note is a real deal. And that was the first real kind of experience that I had. Like, yeah, you're in the game for real when you sign that note. So there's some responsibility that goes with it. And, but having that older partner with me along the way, and the group out of San Antonio, the 2 brothers, that just they were amazing, because they helped me find the way, and really they showed me the way. And they made me feel comfortable. So I never really lost sleep at night about any of those.
I love it.
May have been lost sleep at later times in my life, but not this. When I was out on my own, Yeah, but it's a part of the game.
Yeah, absolutely. I love it. I think your advice is right on. That was a very, very interesting story also you shared with us. So thank you so much for that, Chris. So
Sure.
if listeners would like to reach out to you or read about you, where can they find you?
Well, I've got a website, Chris Hotze at chrishotze.com. It's chrishotze.com. And they can also, I wrote a book called Mailbox Money Mindset, which was on the Amazon bestseller list for real estate for almost a year, and came out last September. Still on the bestseller list every couple of weeks. I see it pop back on there. Had a great success. I self-published the book. It's called Mailbox Money Mindset. It's about my drive and determination and my dad's drive to have this passive revenue stream to help protect him if something ever happened with his job, or help protect my mom if something ever happened to him, because he was responsible for all these children. So a mailbox money mindset is this really a passion to have a side income that allows you to maybe not work anymore, or maybe do what you want to do and go find a job that you want to do. It allows you to have a passive revenue stream. So my drive to own real estate was to have checks come in on a monthly basis associated with a predictable stream of revenue and a predictable group of tenants that I knew would be there for a long, long time. And that was based on my dad. And so I write about how that happened in my family culture, and I share with it other people who I've met along the way, many of them immigrants to the United States, who came here with nothing and had the same mindset. And that's a big part of Mailbox Money Mindset. So they can go read the book. And then also I've got a YouTube channel, Chris Hotze. You can check some of my videos out. I interview a lot of people who are real estate developers and who've done it on their own. And many of these people don't have college degrees. And, so a lot of the myths out there that you have to have all these things to be in this business, you have to have money, or it's not necessarily true.
I can tell you I have 3 degrees, and I'm not saying I'm not using them, but anybody can do what I do with the right determination, with the right experience, with the right drive and patience. You can do it all. You don't have to have a lot of money. That's a myth. You don't have to be extremely educated. And I think those that are most successful, it's not in spite of not having a formal, higher education, but it's because of it. Because when you don't have this, you don't have all those 6-figure jobs that are very, lucrative, and it's kind of a golden cage where it's really hard to leave behind you. I think life kind of puts you where you have to fight for yourself. You have to work harder than those with the right or the higher education. So in a way, I completely, I completely understand that. And I think, what you shared with us is great. And I think it definitely opened up my mind to think about other avenues of real estate investing. And I wanted to thank you again for being on my show today, Chris.
Absolutely, Ellie. It was a joy.
All right. I really enjoyed having you, and I really hope you're going to keep doing great things. So again, it's Chris Hotze. It's Hotze. If you want to Google him or look for his book on Amazon.
You're awesome.
All right, Chris.
Really enjoyed it. What a fun interview.
All right. Great. Have a good one, Chris.
Take care.